With Shelley Carroll. She is, of course, the chair of the Budget Committee for the City of Toronto. Good morning.
Good morning.
So thanks for being here. So let's talk about that. Phil Perkins just wrapped up his report saying in Vancouver, property taxes went up 10.7% to sort of work on their budget shortfall. Is a property tax hike potentially on the table in the City of Toronto?
Well, absolutely, because the discussion we're going to have next week about the long-term financial plan isn't really designed to speak to this year's budget specifically. And it's no surprise to me that we see an increase like that in Vancouver. Large cities in Canada are all struggling because we don't have the same funding formula, the same fair deal, if you will, with other orders of government that exists for every other large city in the world. And so we've reached a point in our maturity as a nation and our larger cities like Vancouver, like Montreal, and certainly Toronto, that's larger than both of them. You'd have to combine the population of those two cities to get to the population of Toronto. So it's time to look at those mature funding tools, because property tax really can't do the whole job once you're a city of this size.
Absolutely. So aside from property taxes, what other big moves are you specifically looking to make? The province has said they're not supporting the tolls on the Gardner and Don Valley Parkway. So what other option is there for the city to increase its revenue?
Well, you know, I hope that what the province will do, and the federal government as well, is really read this report and really understand the full magnitude, first of all, of the problem and the need for something that's predictable and ongoing for the next couple of decades. That's the point of a long-term financial plan. But we asked our staff back in February with the former mayor to look at everything. Those tools, if you will, that are legislatively available to us right now, and look at the ones that do successfully sustain other cities, whether we have the permission for them or not. Because what we need to do now is have that conversation with other orders of government that says, you know, you're struggling with COVID recovery as well. So a fair deal for big cities, and particularly ours, may mean a combination of taking financial responsibility for things we're doing for you, but also giving us the powers to stand up, to step up on our own and make this a sustainable city.
How concerned were you, Councillor, when we heard from Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy, the Ontario Finance Minister, earlier this week, talking about Toronto's priorities in terms of looking at the budgets and talking about the money going towards, for example, renaming Dundas Street and sort of hinting that the province won't be sort of passing money on to Toronto because it maybe doesn't have the right priorities. Does that concern you?
Well, that's a consideration that is coming to Council 6 months from now. And Council is going to be considering it in the context of the financial information they're getting today. But we're still going to have to consider that because we commissioned that work with leaders of the Black community, leaders of the Indigenous community, so we'll still have that before us. But we are taking the actions we need to take right now to be able to run the city as best we can with a chronic funding gap that is somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion, and has been so for the last 20 years. We've taken many of the actions that other governments suggest.
And revenue is very important, but when you look at kind of short-term things that can be done immediately, there have been some opinions out there and op-eds about perhaps canceling the World Cup and, you know, looking at things like Taylor Swift bringing in more money for the city. Is that something even up for discussion or consideration?
Well, here's the thing. Those things don't bring money to the city. They bring money to the provincial and federal governments. To have a thriving city, you must have an economic and culture strategy, and that's something that we always work on, and that makes us a world-class city. But we don't benefit from those. Taylor Swift is going to come to town for 6 nights, and people from all over Ontario are going to flock in. I've heard of people coming from Alberta that were lucky enough to get tickets. They'll stay in hotel rooms, they'll eat in all of our restaurants, they'll buy those tickets, and we won't benefit from that because we're reliant on property tax, which wasn't designed to take part in any economic boom. It's not even based on people's wealth. We only have this one tool, and it doesn't allow us to capitalize on people who are extremely successful in this city because it is such a big city. And so That's the next level. That's what makes a large city thrive. That's how New York City runs, Chicago, Houston, I could go on. And it's time for Canada to look at that for cities.
But, Council, how concerned are you about the fact that this is happening in this sort of economic time frame right now, in an inflationary period when mortgage rates are eating into so many people's budgets and things like that, that the city is in this crunch at a time when, quite frankly, people, homeowners, taxpayers, et cetera, don't really have additional money to dig in to sort of try to, help the city out more or contribute more towards the city? It seems like this is sort of a vicious cycle or a perfect storm in a way.
Well, that's exactly why we can't continue to rely on property tax alone, because it's not based on people's wherewithal. It really isn't. It's based on the assessed value of your property.
Yeah.
I bought my house, a beautiful house in the suburbs, for $280,000.
Yeah.
Now I am doing well, but what if I was a pensioner with no company pension, just CPP?
Yeah.
I'd be stuck.
Yeah.
Because my house is now worth, what houses are
Yeah,
worth in
Toronto. Yeah.
And that's why property tax is the wrong tool as a city begins to grow as ours has grown. Things are tough right now. The economy is uncertain. But if you had something that sustains cities that does look at income, then what happens during an economic boom? We had wonderful economic times here between the years 2000 and 2010. But the city was never able to capitalize on that. The province did very well on it. The federal government did very well on it and redistributed those income funds generated in Toronto to the rest of the country. It's time to look at Toronto and say, how do we give it access to that success so that it can thrive?
Yeah. So, for example, maybe Taylor Swift has to pay money in order to come perform in Toronto.
Well, imagine if for every ticket we got 1 penny on the dollar for everybody who bought a ticket.
Yeah.
That's what a 1-cent sales tax would do. Yeah. And certainly those tickets are only bought by those that can afford them.
Right.
Yeah.
We need a tax that looks at those people who can invest in the city and protects those who need it to be as affordable as possible.
Yeah. We'll see if those senior levels of government are ready for that conversation. Budget Chief Shelley Carroll, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate this. It'll be an interesting day down at City Hall.
Yeah. It will indeed.
Thank you so much.